All right, my friends, and welcome back to the Dwarf Fortress Iceberg Explained. If you need an intro, tiers 1, 2, and 3 are also on this channel. Go ahead and circle back and check those out. But today we are talking tier 4, Deep Waters. So it's gonna get crazy. Jumping right in, item 1. Adventurer retains consciousness after death. This is a really interesting one. I wasn't aware of this, but once your adventurer is dead, you can still check for now useless things like the next odor that they smell. You can prompt the odor message, even though your adventurer is laying dead. Odor message will specifically say, things smell bad when you are dead. So the game is aware that you're dead, but it's still giving you sensory information. You can check temperature. It'll say, being dead is cold and clammy. You can ask for the date and time. It'll say, you've lost track of time since your death. You can ask about the weather. It'll say, there is no sunlight when you are dead. So this kind of suggests that the adventurer retains their consciousness the whole time after their death, which is a very, very dark idea. Check the description for the original source on this, for the write-up and the iceberg that I'm using. And also check the comments for timestamps if you want to jump to any entry in this whole tier. Bearded female dwarves. Now this is one that I feel passionately about. I feel passionately about bearded female dwarves. But no, I've talked about this on my channel before. I have a very specific take, and this is a matter of debate within the community, and there's evidence on both sides. My take is that the official canon reason for why dwarves can collect fish without fishing is at some point, I believe it was Tarn Adams, one of the creators said, oh, they don't need fishing rods or they don't need nets or any kind of equipment because every dwarf has a mighty beard, and they just walk into the water and there's bits of food in their beard, and the fish come and swim to get the food and they get trapped in the luscious thick beard. Every dwarf can fish. Female dwarves can fish. So I take that as every dwarf has a luscious thick beard. Now, people in my comments have corrected me or given the other side of the debate here, which is that very, very technically, if you go into the raw code, Dwarf Fortress simulates every single part of the body on every single entity. Every toe, every finger, every kidney, every eyeball. And in the specific coding, it does specifically have body detail. So this is under body detail plans in the code, and it's called facial hair tissue layers. So that's basically the code version of a beard. And that is specifically included in the male version, included in the female version. However, it is commented out. If in coding, you can basically mark a line of code as for the computer to never read. So female dwarves have the line of code for beards, but it is commented out. So when the game actually generates, Technically, the female dwarves do not have beards. However, lore-wise, as I've said, they do, because fishing is kind of coded in a simple way that involves no equipment. So you make your own choice on that. By this specific game code right now, and in most versions, female dwarves do not have beards. However, there is strong lore evidence to the contrary. It's something you're going to have to make your own decision how you feel about all those facts. Dwarven economy. Now this is a fascinating one. This was a feature so ambitious that it was removed very, very early in version, well, 0.31 is not that early, but pretty dang early. The brothers Adams are just so insanely ambitious. Like, I feel like Dwarf Fortress is an incredibly, it's not my opinion, it's a famously detailed simulator, but economy simulators are also incredibly detailed in their own way. If you just want to build an economy simulator, it can take as much work as Dwarf Fortress. So anyway, they tried to build a specific dwarven economy, which actually affected every dwarf. So it's considered both a remove feature and a future feature because Toady hasn't given up on putting this into the game, but it really needs a lot of work. It's basically like its own game. For it to work the way he wants it to, it would have to be its own game in terms of like all the rules you have to follow. So honestly, I'm glad it doesn't exist right now because that would be just another thing to manage and stress about, and I would not know where to start. But so when it was activated, it added personal wealth, starting at 200 dwarf bucks to every non-noble and non-legendary dwarf in the fortress. It made food and objects require money. They had to be purchased by each dwarf, and bedrooms also had to be rented. Insane. If you know and play Dwarf Fortress now, like, mind-breaking, like, it would really change everything. Coins would need to be minted. That was where coins came from. Coins are kind of useless. I mean, it can be a good way to like get extra metal to the trader in a way that's not too heavy, but like coins, you really don't need to make coins nowadays, but they were created so that every dwarf could actually keep track of their own dwarf bucks and pay for food and board. Coins could be minted, used as currency, although this is an example of how it wasn't completed, really. The fortress could operate using vaulted coins, so coins just sitting in a secure stockpile, or even no physical currency at all, so coins were optional, apparently. Shops could be built to allow dwarves to spend excess wealth, and legendary noble dwarves would have effectively unlimited wealth. They would be exempt. They would eat and drink and sleep in beds for free. The whole system just had way too many problems, too many new things to figure out in the code and in the gameplay as well. For example, children had access to their parents' wealth. So basically, kids would have glitched money because of their parents. Legendary and noble dwarves also tended to hoard items they liked and just pile them in their rooms for no reason, making them unusable for the rest of the fortress. So because there was a cost to everything except for legendary and noble dwarves would just collect everything and be like, that's mine. Also, with physical coins, stacks of these couldn't be merged, so eventually you'd have all your dwarves spending their time carrying coins one at a time across your fortress and back, thus spending less time earning wages. And that's another thing. They'd have to earn wages with work. Countless problems. So they not put a fork in it, because that means you're done. They put a pin in it and they said, all right, we're going to take this out. Maybe eventually we'll figure out a way that works. Now dwarves live in kind of perfect communism overall, and the only economy to speak of is trading back and forth, swapping things, like proper barter of objects with traders. And then overall, your fortress's wealth is calculated that way. It still keeps track of everything your fortress owns and all the things that your fortress has traded out into the world with dwarf bucks. There are other YouTube videos about the dwarven economy that you can check out. Necromancer experiments. Experiments are a class of creature. They are procedurally generated night creatures in terms of their specific classification. They are created by necromancers or certain goblin leaders who experiment on captured citizens and livestock. Think of the dog girl in Full Metal Alchemist. Well, that's a sad example. They are typically based off of one modified creature. So it'll be like, it started as a dog, but then it'll have whatever, insect antennas and wings or something. But the base creature will be a dog or a cow or a dwarf or a human. However, failed experiments also exist. They generally come in the form of blobs, snakes, and worms. There are also giant amalgamations. So think of giant Frankenstein monster kind of thing, which are, as you might expect, created from multiple creatures instead of one. Some have intelligence and can rejoin civilization, in which case they may become playable in adventure mode. And similar to the angels we mentioned in Tier 3, despite their varied appearance, they also have some of the same traits. They are kind of consistent in the way that a lot of very difficult to kill monsters are. They lack hunger, breathing, and they have the ability to destroy buildings in most versions. That tends to be depend on the version. So basically, big bad night creatures, and they will be procedurally generated mixtures of creatures that necromancers have created, or goblin leaders apparently. Wagons are alive. Now this is a really fascinating one. Wagons are a very unique, when you first embark, your dwarves start out at a kind of at a meeting area. It's technically a meeting area because they gravitate. So when you first start an embark, you notice there's the wagon, which is broken down. It's got one wheel taken off. In a lot of the modern art, at least, it kind of symbolizes that the dwarves traveled until the wagon was becoming untenable. Anyway, you start a new embark with your dwarves milling around the wagon. Wagons are used by humans and dwarven caravans to bring goods to your trade depot. Not to bring goods. Oh, wagons are also used by non-player dwarves, humans and dwarven caravans. Like your liaison will bring goods to your trade depot as well. So wagons, when you first embark, you have a broken down wagon, and then there are living wagons, or there are active wagons rather, that are used by caravans to bring things to your... The game technically considers them to be creatures due to a lot of the special things that they need to be able to do. They couldn't really code wagons as buildings. So in terms of the code that existed, they had to code them as living things. So the game considers them to be creatures with massive hauling capacity. So basically it's coded like a pack animal, but with massive hauling capacity. And it is also the only multi-tile creature of the game. Although that may no longer be true. No, I think it is. I'm thinking in terms of the Steam version, because sometimes they'll have a creature which the art makes them look bigger than a tile, but I think they're all still assigned to one tile. So it is, correct me in the comments if you can think of anything else, but even giant creatures, even though they're drawn larger, they take up one tile, I believe. But so this write-up says it's the only multi-tile creature of the game, which I would believe, now that I thought about it. Because of their size, they require specific accommodations to reach your fortress. Wagon accessible paths must be 3 tiles wide extend from natural land tiles at the screen border to your trade depot and cannot contain traps or pressure plates. So because they're technically considered to be creatures, wagons are listed as deceased after being scuttled. When you break down your wagon is stationary when you embark, your own wagon that got your dwarves there, and you can scuttle it, you can take it apart for the wood, and it will list your wagon as deceased or as missing if there was no witness. If, somehow, like if a monster burned it up or something. They can be memorialized after their deaths. I feel like this write-up does not apply necessarily to every version of Dwarf Fortress, because that sounds like something that was probably patched out. But so, the write-up also adds, when a wagon is scuttled, it will leave behind a unique type of wood, wagon wood, which functions like normal wood, but dwarves can have a preference for wagon wood. So basically it is a wooden creature made out of its own living flesh wagon wood, and it is technically, at least in some versions, the largest creature in the game, the strongest hauling creature in the game, and that's basically just built in terms of the fact that it needs to haul things like a pack animal, and it needs to move around in a controlled way that Furniture doesn't do in Dwarf Fortress. So that's neat. Technically, wagons are alive. Drag Slay. So when Tarn was in 6th grade, he and his brother Zach, developed their first fantasy game called Drag Slay, and it was written in BASIC, and this is actually very close to my heart. I'm going to do a quick little tangent. I was also in 5th and 6th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, writing simple little games in BASIC. And this is not even if you're a programmer, you've probably heard of Visual Basic. Not even Visual Basic. Before that, the early 90s BASIC. There was a generation of us who, right around the millennium, were writing simple games in BASIC. Mine was called Zippy, the single-celled paramecium. It was an action game that mostly used bouncing ball physics, simple bouncing ball physics. This Iceberg is not about me. Drag Slay was Tarn and Zach Adams' version of that. When they were in 6th grade, they wrote a game in BASIC. We're talking like Windows 95, 98. It consisted of single battles leading to a final encounter with a dragon, and according to Toady, who is Tarn, this was a 2D project in a somewhat isometric view where you walked around a cave with a bunch of goblins in loincloths. It was entertaining but short-lived. A few years later, Tarn rewrote it in C programming, so, updated it basically. They stopped using BASIC. I put so much effort into BASIC, and then it became an archaic language. But so Tarn rewrote it in C to keep it current, keep it compilable on modern machines, and it featured minute details and kept track of populations of units in the generated world. This write-up says it was never released publicly, so this is just something he's talked about in interviews. Today also said this is the game where Armok was first mentioned, and this entry is mostly to give context to this next entry, so get ready. Armok, aka Arm-OK. The name of the blood god, Armok, god of blood, that Dwarf Fortress is named after, that its prequel is named after, that the whole lineage of Adams Brothers games. Armok, Godhead of Gods, is actually from a variable in Drag Slay's code, the previous entry. There was a variable just called arm_OK, as in your arm is okay, the arm is intact, you can use it as an arm. It was used to indicate how many arms your character had left for inventory purposes. Oh, maybe I explained that wrong. I thought it literally meant if you got an arm severed that the arm-OK would go away, but apparently this is... It may have instead have been a token for inventory arms, meaning weapons. So leave in the comments if you have any more context on that. Either that your physical arm was fine or that the state of an axe or a sword was fine. Anyway, Arm-OK became Armok, and this was immediately used afterwards by a Bay12 forums user as a name, and afterwards it stuck. Armok, god above gods. Boogeymen are a manifestation of fear. So if you caught my recent video about Boogeymen, I was new to these. They used to be everywhere. They used to really just be everywhere at night during adventure mode. They were kind of nerfed, brought back, nerfed only in terms of their geographical range. So now you won't really see them in fortress mode, but you will in adventure mode. If you're in an evil biome and it's nighttime, Boogeymen will come out. Here's why they're a manifestation of fear. They can transform into any number of crazy things at the drop of a hat. They will immediately, first of all, they criticize you. They use swear words. They're specifically very rude even before combat begins. They will stalk you. They will bully you. And then once combat begins, they will transform into any number of creatures that you would be terrified to encounter. Another thing that adds to the theory that Boogeymen are a manifestation of fear is that dawn will cause them to disappear in a puff of smoke, as will if you go into a safe place, a place where your adventurer would feel safe. The Boogeymen cannot follow. They can duplicate according to this write-up. I didn't realize this, but apparently one Boogeyman can even become more Boogeymen. But they do disintegrate into smoke when killed or exposed to the dawn or when the adventurer escapes. The fact that they seem to show up specifically to give you a really traumatic night, and whatever that takes, they'll transform and teleport around, and then as soon as the night is over, they just kind of puff out of existence, no problem. They basically are physical manifestations of the fear that intelligent creatures in the world feel. Now, here's what really cinches it. Here's what proves it. Boogeymen will be friendly towards creatures with the no fear token. So if you play as a no fear intelligent creature, you're totally safe from boogeymen. In an unmodded game, currently, as of this write-up at least, they're mostly arachnid people. So you could be a bark scorpion man, you could be a brown recluse spider man, you could be a jumping spider man. Some form of Spider-Man for some reason has no fear of boogeymen. Arachnids, sentient arachnids tend not to. So boogeymen will still show up. They will still approach you and hurl insults and laugh and cackle and teleport towards you. But for some reason, the no fear token takes away most of their actual dangerous abilities. So they are driven by fear. They are fueled by fear, which is neat. So if you do mod Dwarf Fortress, you can put a no fear token on there and do some fun stuff with boogeymen. Well, it'll just be like a very rude little man who teleports around and cajoles you with things that should not be said. Bayend.ogg. So this is just a little Easter egg. I had never heard of this. It's a short sound file of a pig oinking, and during the classic introduction, available before the Steam release, during that famous Bay-12 Games cutscene where the dwarf is like, he's breaking through a vein or something. So you can't usually hear it, but if you grab the title bar while the program is saying quality and drag it around a bit, when you release it, a pig will oink. You can listen to it under data/sound/bayend.ogg. I don't know, this is before the Steam release, and very, very small, so you can't try it in the latest versions. Don't be disappointed if you try it on Steam. It only works on the earlier versions, apparently. Yeah, if you do something very specific, you can hear a pig oink. All adventurers are asexual. So this boils down to basically, in summary, there is a romance, marriage, love system in Dwarf Fortress, but it has not been figured out for adventure mode. So there are specific lines of code. The structure of adventure mode is such that your adventurer needs to be asexual because they haven't coded in what would happen if they weren't. Each creature with male and female casts can have different sexual orientations, and intelligent creatures can have 3 possible orientations for each gender. They can be uninterested, romance. So the orientations are basically like levels of interest that they can have. So it can go up to uninterested, it can go up to romance, and it can go up to marry. So for example, a dwarf with male romance and female marry will possibly romance male dwarves, but will only marry female dwarves, as an example. Adventurers created as playable characters for adventure mode will always be uninterested by both genders in vanilla game, making them practically aromantic and asexual, perhaps and the theory, I think this is correct, perhaps to prevent the player's adventurer from marrying and having children without the player's consent, because the way these are coded in, usually the dwarf, the character, is not a playable person, so they decide when they want to romance and marry. But if you're controlling your character, then they might be automatically, you walk into a bar and your adventurer proposes to a bird woman in there or something. And that would be a little confusing, so they just took it out. Orientations can be changed with DF hack, in which case it is unknown if player adventure characters can have lovers or children when retired and left alone long enough. So hypothetically, because you can't really check on your adventurer after you retire them, as far as I know, unless they are so legendary that they keep doing things in the lore and showing up in legends. But hypothetically, you could use DF hack to make them not asexual, and then it is unknown by me and the person who wrote this write-up if they would then begin to seduce and form families with other characters. On top of that, it should be noted no romance or intercourse dialogue exists in adventure mode. So again, they took it out just because it's not programmed in. Even if your adventurer was love-stricken, wanted to marry somebody they met at a tavern, they would not know what to say. There would be no romance dialogue to be had. Non-Euclidean tile size. This is a funny one. This is an easy one for everybody to understand, even though the title is a little intimidating. If you've been playing for any amount of time, the size of one tile is very unclear. It's often inconsistent. This write-up says unclear is actually selling it short. It is generally suggested that tiles in Dwarf Fortress are between 2 and 3 meters long and 3 meters high. However, what counts as filling a tile can range from anything from 2 cats, with one crouching and the other one making space for the second one on top, to dozens of adult dragons, to 500,000 marble blocks. The only real explanation, quote-unquote real explanation for this, is that tiles in Dwarf Fortress are non-Euclidean, meaning that their dimensions exist outside of our understanding of three-dimensional space. Since mathematician scholars exist in the game, one can wonder if they have a better understanding of how space works in Dwarf Fortress than we do. So that's really just a funny one. It's just that every entity or item or object has its own rules for what can fit in one tile. You know, an amount of water, an amount of magma, in addition to the examples involving cats and dwarves and stockpiles that we already discussed and dragons. So it's really inconsistent. So they're being funny. Maybe it's a 11-dimensional string theory kind of thing that causes that to be consistent in a way that our minds can't perceive. Headless children. Now this is a good one. This is the kind of iceberg entry that I like to talk about because it is the combination of a very interesting glitch. It's a little hiccup in the code, and it generates things that are in the lore, in the context of actually playing Dwarf Fortress, are horrifying and eldritch and Lovecraftian. So, headless children are a semi-rare glitch caused by a pregnant dwarf entering your fort. Basically, rather than having the mother give birth as normal, the pregnant baby is accidentally quote-unquote born off-screen. But since its age is below 0, it's typically -1, it's -1 years old. The game wigs out, and that's how this write-up describes it. The game wigs out and has it act like a child. So basically, the game is procedurally generating a pregnant mother with a fetus inside, but then she enters from off-screen in a way that causes a little glitch in the code, and it says, okay, that's going to be a mother and a child who is -1 year old. Actually, you know, we could talk about maybe, I don't know if the dwarven gestational period is exactly 9 months like a human, but approximately -1 year old because it hasn't yet been born, and this causes glitches, as you might expect. It's kind of like an overflow error of a dwarf's age, so it is a 1-year-old child, but it's actually a 0 to -1-year-old child in other parts of where the code is calling this information. So the glitch is mostly graphical. This is where the headless part comes in. The glitch was a very old glitch, and it was present in many versions, most versions of Dwarf Fortress, and before the premium release. But premium release has really good graphics, and because we didn't have dynamic graphics generating the facial features back then, the glitch would usually be unnoticed. It would be like a normal child. It would crawl around, it would seek its mother. It wouldn't operate any differently, but specifically in the Steam release, because it actually generates the facial features of every dwarf, it's obvious that it is a headless child. So that's just one of the glitches. It doesn't have a face yet because it's not technically born yet in terms of its age. Don't worry, once the child is officially 0 years old, that is to say, officially born in terms of its chronological age, on the day they were supposed to be born, the head will finally appear as normal. The headless child will suddenly grow a head on its first official birthday, when it's supposed to exist. So yeah, this is a neat one. I like when there's a interesting glitch, and then it's also makes some freaky stuff happen. All right, magical item attribute. This is one, if you want to know more, check out my video on the upcoming magic update. Magic is still being coded into Dwarf Fortress. It's been being coded in for years, but basically magic is a long teased feature that now exists in a limited form. In adventure mode mostly, there's a few other little echoes of it already being implemented in Fortress mode, and that's what we're going to talk about here actually. So magic items now will at least sometimes work. So the magical tag actually empowers some kind of specific magic. That's the progress we've made so far, at least last I checked. I think that's being actively implemented. So the devs probably have all kinds of exciting news, but their abilities on these magic items are mostly coded from Necromancy, which is the main magic that already exists. Necromancy was coded in much earlier than any other type of magic, so most spells that you're going to see in Adventure Mode or Fortress Mode right now are going to be like variants on Necromancy. Interesting note, there's also a magical tag that can be applied to creatures, and currently it is more or less completely interchangeable. It's the same thing as the tag called At Peace with Wildlife. So it may be a relic of a very early pre-release version of the game where it was used by wandering wizards or like Ents, like Ent-type tree creatures. The magical tag applies to some creatures, and it has the simultaneous effect as At Peace with Wildlife, basically that like they won't be eaten by wolves or bears. They're cool with the forest at every level. They're guests there. And if you want to know more, I did like a semi-long video, like a 15-minute long video. Type in SSBU replay depository or go on my channel, and sort by most popular. I think it got like 3,000 views if you want to know more about the state of magic in Dwarf Fortress at this time. Turing complete dwarven computing. So extremely creative and dedicated players can create complex constructions in Fortress mode, and these are able to log and store and calculate basic digital logical operations and calculations. You can use fluids, you can use mechanisms, minecarts, even animals can be used to make logic gates, adders, subtractors, memory cells, everything that your computer has, so that the processor and the graphics card and the hard drive are all, and the RAM, mostly the RAM, not so much the hard drive, sometimes the hard drive. But you can make a computing machine in Dwarf Fortress that is Turing complete, which is a computing science term that means that it can simulate any Turing machine, which means it's able to compute any conceivable, possible computable sequence. In terms of scalability, if you built it large enough, if you gave it enough processing and RAM and storage, it could be a supercomputer, it could be an AI, it could be anything. So there are only a few games that qualify that are so granular in terms of what you can control. City Skylines is another example, Minecraft is an example, but Dwarf Fortress is an example. Dwarven computers are more spacious and run slower than even the earliest real-life computers, the ones that took up a whole room at Roswell or something, and they would run slightly faster than a pocket calculator today. It would run much slower than even the worst computer a Zoomer has ever seen, but they could conceivably, with enough RAM and storage and processing, they could do any calculation in the universe. You can build those computers in Dwarf Fortress, which is very cool. So that's Turing complete Dwarven computing, which is a little bit of a tongue twister. I do vocal warm-ups for a lot of these. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, tip of the tongue and the teeth and the lips. I slit a sheet I slit, etc. I do a lot of these warm-ups to not stumble over myself, even though I still do. But Turing complete Dwarven computing is a new one. I'm going to try to remember for my warm-ups. I say, how now, brown cow? Turing complete Dwarven computing. That's a good one. All right. Night trolls convert and forcibly mate with their captives. I don't want to talk about this one, but I have to. It's part of the iceberg. So night trolls are another ultimate nightmare creature like Boogeymen. They're procedurally generated night creatures, mostly found in lairs while playing adventure mode. So you really have to find them in adventure mode to deal with this. But they do have a method of reproduction in game, and it is quite disturbing. So all natural night trolls are the same sex. They are the same biological formation. To reproduce, a night troll kidnaps a non-goblin, so because trolls and goblins work together, I guess, forcibly takes some other humanoid. Specifically, it says non-goblin, opposite sex, civilized being, and transform the victim into another night troll of the opposite sex. That's the only way to get. And this write-up doesn't specify. Is it sexist? I assume that the night trolls start as male and they convert females. Leave it in the comments. I don't know. But so they transform into another night troll, the process by which is not known, nor is the reason why it cannot be done on the goblins, although presumably so that the night trolls don't start cannibalizing goblins constantly to make spouses. And then upon the existence of a reverse sex night troll, procreation happens. Why they have to reproduce like this is never explained, neither whether they can mate with another pre-existing night troll consort, or why they need to procreate. Well, they can turn any non-goblin civilized creature into a night troll, which is a very good point. If you can just transform people into night trolls, you don't have to procreate at all, do you? So very disturbing. I don't know, the Brothers Adams should maybe look into that. I think maybe night trolls need to be canceled. Undead giant sponges. So giant sponges are normally harmless. They live in the water and they mind their own business like a sponge in the real world. But in older versions, once they were turned into undead, they became a zombie with hatred towards all living things, which is a classic staple of Undead in Dwarf Fortress. So if somehow you were in an evil embark or a zombie bit a sponge, it would be an undead sponge. And if it was a giant sponge, here's what would happen. Any kind of edge attack against them would only tear the body at best, and blunt attacks made no damage at all, making them virtually invincible. This has been fixed in later versions. We're going to talk about that in a second. But with the invention of pulping, which is an important... If you don't know pulping yet, it's where dwarves use something heavy and they smash something into atoms. They smash it into little molecules. And that is often an important way to kill undead things. But so on top of them being virtually invincible physically, due to their large size, their default push attack was able to shatter bones, break articulations and bruise organs, or even kill a dwarf via headshot somehow. So if a dwarf was just walking through the river and an undead sponge lunged at them with full force, it might crush their skull in. Because of that, undead giant sponges became the new bearers of the King of Beasts. They had that title. They became the new bearers of the King of Beasts, replacing carp and elephants, who are also famously, they will bash you to death, they will mush you up for no reason. This eventually came to an end when pulping was introduced in version 0.4. Allows you to mangle corpses again, as I said, turn them into atoms or molecules. And so if all else fails, you can just mash something up sufficiently. This write-up notes regarding undead giant sponges, without a nervous system, the only thing it can feel is anger. Post-world gen, world stagnation. This refers to the phenomenon of world history just kind of plateauing after initial world generation. If you've ever started a Dwarf Fortress game at all, you're familiar with this. It generates the world, all kinds of amazing wars and giant dragons, and like a Superman monster comes down and completely changes the face of the continent. And then, trade spirals out. It's incredible procedural generation stuff. But once you start playing, world history kind of stops. It becomes less chaotic. And mostly it's the things you do that actually add to legends. So they haven't coded in that kind of excitement into actual playable game. But, and if they did, your game, losing is fun would become even more realistic, because you'd be doing great, having a great time, and suddenly 5,000 dragons would roll in and just kill everyone with no recourse. So the world in being made is very chaotic, is very warfare and cataclysm. But the game calms down once you start playing. And mostly it's just the things you do that get added to Legends mode, which is the standard. Legends mode marks everything in your game that is like world changing. So when you generate a world, it'll have all kinds of crazy things that you're like, wow, that would be amazing to see. But that stuff tends to not happen as you're playing. It does seem there is some mechanic that slows down calculations for distant or unrelated civilizations. It seems like they don't rock quite as hard when you're playing the main Dwarf Fortress, the titular Dwarf Fortress. So that's all it is. Goblin snatchers rescue children from the player. This is kind of a tongue-in-cheek one. This is another kind of funny one, but it makes sense. I mean, you could subscribe to this if you believed in it. So it's a tongue-in-cheek theory stating that the goblin snatchers who ambush your fortress to abduct dwarven children are doing it for the benefit of the children. If you know, of course, one of the early raids, kobolds or goblins or humans or anyone will come in. There'll be individual thieves, and there'll be ambushes, and somewhere in there are child snatchers, which is a very dark, grimdark. Dwarf Fortress is a grimdark game, so it's a grimdark idea. They will steal your children if you're not careful, if you don't watch them and defend them, as you should. Kind of like real life, you got to be careful. But so this is a jokey bit that the reason that goblins and kobolds or humans are coming to steal children is not simply to swell the ranks of their own armies by brainwashing them and raising them to be soldiers in their own armies. It's that you, as the player of a very, very cruel game called Dwarf Fortress, any child who is stolen off the map from you, the player, is probably going to have a better life than you, the player, could give them. Just kind of a comment on how dark gameplay tends to get, and on how units that leave your map are handled in a kind of overarching way by the computer, and probably don't suffer as creatively terrible fates as human failure can produce. Kobold Quest. So Kobold Quest was a game by the Toady One, released in September 2006. It was released a month after the first version of Dwarf Fortress. So very early. Remember again, our version of Dwarf Fortress is the 0.50 version, if you're playing Steam, of Dwarf Fortress 2, Slaves to Armok 2, so the second game in the whole series. But in Kobold Quest, early on, the player takes control of 10 kobolds to help them defending their cave against adventurers by laying traps. It looks a lot like ASCII DF, using the same curses library as early Dwarf Fortress and other Bay 12 games, and it is relevant to the next entry. You can still download Kobold Quest if you would like to from the Bay 12 game site. Just give it a little web search for Kobold Quest by the Brothers Adams. The true appearance of kobolds. So kobolds exist in fantasy media, but their appearance varies wildly in terms of who's writing it. Dwarf Fortress is no exception. Before the premium release, Kobold actually players could imagine kobolds however they wanted to. So how they looked was a matter of opinion. It varied quite wildly from player to player. A lot of people made fan art, and they imagined kobolds to be scaly, reptilian, dragon-like creatures, dragon-like humanoids. This is apparently how they are in Dungeons & Dragons. Kobolds in Dwarf Fortress are officially described, however, as small, mammalo-reptilian humanoids with pointy ears and yellow eyes with a penchant for trickery and mischief, context-based sub-language, poisonous critter collection, traps, and kleptomechanical hoarding. So let's break that down. Mammalian reptilian, which means that they are scaly like dragons, but they're also warm-blooded, potentially hairy. They are humanoids. Yellow eyes. They're mischievous and tricky. They have context based on sub-language, which means that they're subtle. They chatter to each other, and it's very hard to understand exactly what they're communicating. They collect poisonous critters, means they're fascinated with spiders and snakes and arachnids, which is pretty creepy. I actually didn't know that about them. And they love traps and mechanical hoarding. They're like gremlins or gnomes. They're closely related to gnomes or gremlins, where they're tricky, clever little guys, but they love trouble and things normal humans and dwarves don't like. Their appearance in Kobold Quest, shown as discussed previously, was their official DF look before the premium update, which incorporated a distinct rounded snout on their sprites' faces, which changed from the flat faces of the initial Kobold Quest sketch. Graphically, kobolds can appear from different shades of brown skin. They can also have ears that point up, down, or anywhere in between. So it's still kind of your choice. But basically, I imagine like an armadillo, like a reptilian-style mammal, right? That's like an armadillo to me. But so a reptilian-style mammal, and they're very interesting. They're kind of creepy and gross. But they are clever, and they're interesting. Intelligent cave dragons. So the write-up itself says, I can't explain why this happens. So we're talking about glitches or some deep Easter egg that people don't tend to understand. But during world generation, it can happen that cave dragons join civilizations. They may even get important noble posts, as though they were intelligent, civilized creatures, although they don't have these required raw tags. So the same way we talked earlier about it can be magical, at peace at nature, it can be sentient, it can be intelligent. Dragons don't have the tags that would allow them to be the baron of some society. However, during world generation, cave dragons will be worshipped or respected as whatever, barons, mountain home kings, all kinds of things. So that's just like a strange glitch or a hiccup or maybe an Easter egg that exists. But before you start playing your fortress, cave dragons in particular can join civilizations, can be assigned to important posts, which is fun. I imagine that's like an Easter egg, like Smaug, from Lord of the Rings or something, from The Hobbit, right? That's Smaug. But a dragon that can chat and talk and has money to spend, so why shouldn't it be an important official of a nearby city? All right, and final entry, guys. If you haven't liked or subscribed, please feel free, and I would encourage you to. YouTube is a cruel mistress, and it really tries to encourage you to stop making content unless you get enough attention. So it's training me to love attention. I would love attention from y'all in terms of likes and subscriptions, things like that. But God bless you in either case. All right, last entry. Gor Puzzle Sneak, the Knot of Hexes. So in Tier 1 and 2, we talked about Tholtig. They had an incredible multiple dozens of thousands of kill count. In Legends, before the world properly started, we talked about how the world will have incredible heroes that don't tend to actually happen when you're actually playing. But so, Gor Puzzle Sneak, the Knot of Hexes, was an elephant demon who killed 87,763 sapient creatures during World Gen, which includes 6,148 named ones. So a named one is a generally legendary person. They've done enough that their name is recorded in history. Over 6,000 of these legendary entities were destroyed by Gor Puzzle Sneak. Surprisingly, she never got much of a chance to shine in the early history. She was captured by a human civilization who then teamed up with a nearby dwarven civilization to harry her original Goblin civilization almost to the point of extinction. You would have to do your own research on that. I don't know that story. That's a crazy story. At which point, apparently, she also escaped. So, truly legendary. I imagine a lot of this is literally in Legends, as opposed to through gameplay. But, Gor Puzzle Sneak, the Knot of Hexes, read about her. Because she is an elephant monster of incredible violence, some say she was actually born of the evil of boat murdered, which we talked about in an earlier tier, is a fascinating, famous map where elephants killed a lot of things. And guys, that's all we have for tier 4. Everything's going to work out.